What a race. In the words of Muhammad Ali, we shook up the world.
Billed by some as a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party.
A narrow victory for 41-year-old progressive Abdul El-Sayed.
Defeating establishment centrist candidate Congresswoman Haley Stevens.
He hates Jews and he hates Israel. Abdul El-Sayed.
If you can't say the name, it's Abdurrahman, keep the name out your damn mouth.
We need more people in the Senate who will fight for working families.
God forbid you're going to have President El-Sayed in 3 years.
The left-wing political outsider Abdul El-Sayed's narrow victory in Michigan's Democratic primary has been branded another big win for America's progressives. But as Democrats prepare to take the fight to Donald Trump and the Republicans in November, can the left wing of the party, labelled as communist by the president, unite with the centrist wing? And if so, can they do it in time to present a united front that can convince voters of the party's strategy? Well, we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so in today's big story looking at those questions. Well, with us is our North America correspondent Anthony Zerka, who's in Washington following the story. Let's start with Abdul El-Sayed. He's fairly new on the national scene, so tell us more about him.
Fairly new. He's 41 years old. He was born in Michigan, the son of Egyptian immigrants. He went to the University of Michigan for college, attended Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He's an epidemiologist by training. He was a public health official in Michigan before going into politics. In 2018, he ran unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination for governor, and then now in 2024, he ran for the Senate seat. Mostly on the same sorts of issues, but he's young, he's charismatic, and he's viewed by many on the progressive left as the next generation of potential leaders.
Well, you touch on it because I was going to ask you why voters in Michigan chose him over the more established Democratic candidate.
Well, one of the things we hear time and time again from Democratic voters across the country, is that they're frustrated that the Democratic Party isn't doing enough to stand up to Donald Trump. They want someone who's a fighter, someone who's willing to full-throatedly espouse Democratic positions, and that's what El-Sayed did. The Democratic voters liked his positions. They wanted someone who was charismatic but also willing to draw bright lines between Donald Trump and, if he gets to Washington, not look for compromise but look for ways of stopping Donald Trump.
And tell us what some of the key issues were for those voters in Michigan.
Well, his policy prescriptions are mostly progressive, ones that people who follow Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others would be familiar with. He talked about Medicare, that's government health insurance for all Americans, expanding that elderly program, raising taxes on the wealthy, getting money out of politics. He also talked about cutting off U.S. military aid to Israel, and that became a big issue during the campaign, and a line of distinction between him and Haley Stevens, the Congresswoman who he defeated. So these are all familiar progressive ideas, but he's focusing more on the economic policies. He said he's going to get money out of politics and put money in Americans' wallets.
Well, you mentioned there that the Middle East and Democrat support for Israel is dividing the party more broadly. There was focus on comments made by Abdul El-Sayed after the Michigan synagogue attack back in March, carried out by a man whose Hezbollah-linked relatives were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Well, back then, he said of the attack, hurt people, hurt people. Well, he was asked about those comments by CBS News on Wednesday.
What did you mean, and do you regret saying it?
What I mean is that hurt people hurt people. Then maybe if we're serious about ending the hurt, we should stop hurting people. I condemned the attack. It was a vile anti-Semitic attack.
Well, let's turn now to Michigan's importance on the national stage, because it's one of the 6 key swing states that in 2024 Donald Trump flipped from Democrat to Republican. But how crucial is Michigan in these midterms that are ahead? Here's Ed O'Keefe from CBS News.
Michigan is one of those states to watch this fall because Democrats need to hold on to their Senate seat here and in the state of Georgia, plus win 4 other Republican-held seats across the country in order to retake control of the U.S. Senate.
Well, let's go back to Anthony in Washington. And Anthony, looking ahead to November in Michigan, who is El-Sayed actually running against?
He's running against a former Congressman, Mike Rogers, who is trying to get back into politics after leaving his House seat in Michigan. He's more of a traditional Republican. He isn't one of these Trump fire breathers, not an election denier. If you imagine the Republican Party 10, 15 years ago, Mike Rogers would fit well into that mold. So it's going to be an interesting contrast between El-Sayed, who is obviously a progressive activist, and Rogers, who's much more traditional establishment type of Republican.
Well, it's not the first time in recent months that a left-wing candidate has won for the Democratic Party, with the biggest name being the mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani. He, like El-Sayed, focused his campaign on lifting the working class and endorsing policies such as free childcare and abolishing the controversial ICE immigration enforcement. Back to Anthony. And Anthony, a couple of final questions. Is this part of a broader trend now within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I think it is. As I mentioned, Democrats are looking for fighters. They're looking for people to stand up to Donald Trump. And you have seen progressives start winning some races, unseating incumbent members of Congress who were viewed as too moderate. Zohran Mamdani, obviously, his success in New York City was a big part of this. But you've seen in places like Colorado, elsewhere in New York, and in some House races in Michigan as well, that this is a trend that Democratic voters are more open to progressive candidates. Whether that actually translates into ballot box success in a battleground state like Michigan that Donald Trump won twice in 2016 and 2024, that's the big question. And I think progressives are hoping that the answer is yes, and that this shows that their policies have wider appeal than just in those deep Democratic parts of the country.
Well, let's finish with that final thought. How do we look and know how progressive candidates have stacked up so far against Republicans?
Well, we haven't seen anyone like Abdul El-Sayed run in a place like Michigan before. We've seen progressives win the Democratic nomination in places that are either solidly Republican and it was a token kind of opposition, or in places that were solidly Democratic, and winning the Democratic primary nomination would be enough to virtually assure victory. This is going to be the big test case. This is going to be someone who is progressive standing in a seat that, as you mentioned, is essential for Democrats to hold on to if they want to flip the Senate.
Anthony Zucker there in Washington. Thanks for taking us through all of that. And that's all you need to know about the primary victory of Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan and what it means for the Democratic Party.